The iron shackles bit into my wrists as I knelt in the dirt, studying the pattern of blood spatter on the barn wall. Sheriff Coleman stood behind me, his shadow falling across the evidence I was examining. "Well, boy," he demanded, his voice tight with frustration. "My reputation's on the line here. The mayor's son is dead. And if I don't find the killer by sundown, they'll have my badge and probably your neck." I traced my finger along the edge of a boot print, feeling the weight of 2 lives hanging in the balance, the innocent man already locked in the jail cell and my own. This was the 5th murder in 3 months, and I was the only one who could see what everyone else missed. But here's the bitter truth. They don't tell you about being invaluable. When you're property, your value doesn't set you free. It chains you tighter. The summer of 1857 arrived in Willowbrook County like a fever, hot and sick with secrets. I remember the exact moment my life changed from simple field hand to something far more complicated. It was the morning they found Thomas Whitmore's body in the creek, his skull caved in, his pockets turned inside out. I was 17 years old, the property of Judge Harold Brenn, and I had spent the first part of that morning doing what I did every morning, hauling water from the well to the big house, my back already aching before the sun had fully risen. But Master Brennan had a visitor that day, Sheriff Coleman, and their raised voices carried through the open windows. The whole town's in an uproar. Harold, the sheriff, was saying, "Whitmore was well liked, and folks are demanding justice. But I've got nothing, no witnesses, no weapon, nothing but a dead body and 100 theories." I shouldn't have been listening. Slaves who listened too carefully to white folks' conversations often found themselves sold south, where the work was harder and life was shorter. But something in the sheriff's voice, a desperate frustration I recognized, made me pause with the water bucket still balanced on my shoulders. "Check the creek bed upstream," I muttered to myself, not realizing I'd spoken aloud until Master Brennan's head appeared in the window. "What did you say, boy?" My blood went cold. I'd learned long ago that speaking without permission was dangerous, but speaking about things that weren't my concern was potentially fatal. "Nothing, master. I apologize." No, I heard you. Something about the creek bed?" Judge Brennan's eyes narrowed, but there was curiosity there, not anger. "Come inside." Now, I set down the buckets and climbed the back steps with my heart hammering. The study smelled of pipe tobacco and old leather. Sheriff Coleman looked me up and down with undisguised skepticism. He was a thick man with a red face and hands that had seen too many whiskey glasses and not enough honest work. "This is Samuel," Judge Brennan said. "He's been with my family since he was born. Smart boy. I taught him to read and write myself, though I'd appreciate you not spreading that around. Against the law, as you know. But I figured a man's property is his business. Samuel, the sheriff here, is investigating Thomas Whitmore's murder. You said something about checking the creek bed upstream." Every instinct screamed at me to stay quiet, to play dumb, to protect myself. But I'd seen something that morning on my way to the well, something that had lodged in my mind like a splinter. "The body was found at the bend in the creek." "Yes, sir." Sheriff Coleman nodded slowly. "The water's been low this summer, running slow. But 3 days ago we had that storm. The creek would have been running fast, high enough to carry a body. If Mr. Whitmore was killed upstream and fell into the water, the current would have brought him down to where he was found. There might be signs of a struggle at the actual murder site, broken branches, disturbed earth, maybe the weapon." The silence that followed felt like it lasted an hour. Sheriff Coleman's face cycled through disbelief, consideration, and finally a grudging interest. "Harold, you've been teaching your property to think. Like a detective." "I've been teaching him to think, period," Judge Brennan replied. "Whether he applies it to detective work is apparently his own innovation." "Samuel, how do you know about such things?" I hesitated. The truth was, I read everything I could get my hands on the newspapers Master Brennan left lying around. Dime novels his daughter Mary discarded, even the legal texts in his study when I was supposed to be dusting. I developed a hunger for stories about crime and justice, perhaps because my own life contained so little of either. I read, master, and I observe. I notice things. Sheriff Coleman snorted. "Well, I'll be damned. Harold, you mind if I borrow your boy for a few hours? If he's right about this upstream theory, I might actually solve this case before the town lynches the wrong man." That was how it began. We rode out to the creek that afternoon, me walking alongside the sheriff's horse. Because a slave didn't ride while white men walked. We found the murder site exactly where I'd predicted, 200 yards upstream. The evidence was clear once you knew where to look. broken saplings, a patch of earth dark with blood that the rain had mostly washed away, and caught in the roots of an overhanging willow, a walking stick with the initials JM carved into the handle. James Morrison, Sheriff Coleman breathed. Whitmore's business partner. They've been feuding over money for months. We found Morrison at his home, already packing to leave town. He confessed within an hour. The murder had been over a debt Whitmore had discovered Morrison was embezzling from their shared accounts. In a rage, Morrison had struck him with the walking stick, then panicked and pushed the body into the creek, hoping it would be swept away or appear to be a robbery. Sheriff Coleman's reputation was secured. The judge's unusual slave became the talk of the county, and I learned the most dangerous lesson of my life. I was good at this, too good. Over the next 2 years, I solved 11 murders and countless robberies and assaults. The sheriff would collect me from Judge Brennan's property whenever a crime proved too difficult for his limited skills. I developed methods, techniques for reading a scene that most men overlooked. I could tell from the pattern of blood whether a man was running or standing still when he was struck. I could determine from footprints whether one person or many had been present. I learned to interview witnesses, watching their eyes and hands for the tiny tells that revealed lies. But my success became my prison in ways I hadn't anticipated. After the Morrison case, Judge Brennan saw my potential value. He began hiring me out to Sheriff Coleman officially, collecting a fee for my services. The money went into the judge's pocket. Of course, I remained property, receiving nothing but the dubious privilege of slightly better food and a small room in the carriage house instead of the slave quarters. The other slaves kept their distance from me. To them, I was something strange and threatening, someone who worked with white men, who spent time in town, who used skills that seemed almost like witchcraft. They called me the sheriff's hound when they thought I couldn't hear. But it was Mary Brennan who truly understood what I was losing. Mary was the judge's youngest daughter, just a year younger than me. We'd grown up together in that peculiar way that happens sometimes between slave children and master's children, close enough to know each other's hearts, but separated by an unbridgeable gulf of circumstance. One evening, after I'd returned from helping solve a warehouse robbery, Mary found me in the carriage house. She wasn't supposed to be there. It was improper for a young white woman to visit the slave quarters, but Mary had never cared much for propriety. "You look tired, Samuel," she said, sitting on an overturned bucket. Her dress was the color of spring leaves, and her dark hair was coming loose from its pins. "I am tired, Miss Mary." "Don't Miss Mary me when we're alone. We've known each other too long for that." She studied my face in the lamplight. "You know what's happening, don't you? Father's never going to free you now. You're too valuable." The truth of her words hit harder, because I've been thinking the same thing. I know, before, when you were just another field hand, he might have eventually freed you in his will like he's promised. But now, you're making him money. You're making Sheriff Coleman look competent. You've become essential. She paused, her voice dropping. "I heard Father talking to Mother. He's planning to advertise your services to other counties. He wants to hire you out as a consulting detective. Samuel, he's going to build a business around you." I sat down heavily on my cot. The room suddenly felt smaller, the walls closer. "What should I do?" "Run," she said simply. "I have some money saved." I could know. I cut her off before she could finish. Running was a death sentence. The slave patrols, the dogs, the wanted posters, I'd seen too many return. Runaways with scars on their backs and defeat in their eyes. Even if I made it north, they'd hunt for me. The sheriff would make it personal, and you'd be implicated in helping me. "I won't put you in danger." Mary's eyes filled with tears. "Then you're trapped. Your mind, your gifts, they're going to keep you enslaved forever." "It's so cruel, Samuel. The very thing that makes you extraordinary is the thing that ensures you'll never be free." We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of impossible choices pressing down on both of us. Finally, Mary stood. "I should go before Father notices I'm gone. But Samuel, don't give up. Even trapped, you're still you. Your mind is still yours. They can own your body, but they can't own your thoughts." After she left, I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling beams. She was wrong, of course. In a way, they did own my thoughts, or at least they owned the products of my thought, the deductions and solutions that I produced like a mill producing grain. Every crime I solved made me more valuable, and less likely to ever taste freedom. But there was one thing Mary had been right about. My mind was still mine, and I began to wonder if there was a way to use my intelligence not just to solve crimes for others, but to solve the greatest crime of all, the theft of my own life. The opportunity came sooner than I expected, in the form of a murder that would test everything I'd learned and force me to make choices that would change not just my life, but the lives of everyone in Willowbrook County. The spring of 1859 brought violence to Willowbrook in a way we'd never seen before. 3 bodies in 3 weeks, all prominent citizens, all killed in their own homes, all murdered in ways that suggested intelligence and planning. The town descended into paranoia. People locked their doors and eyed their neighbors with suspicion. Sheriff Coleman, for all his bluster and borrowed glory from my solution, was overwhelmed. The 4th victim changed everything. His name was Reverend Marcus Abernathy, pastor of the First Baptist Church, and one of the few voices in Willowbrook who occasionally spoke against the worst excesses of slavery. I'd heard him preach once when Judge Brennan required all his slaves to attend a special service. Reverend Abernathy had spoken about all souls being equal before God, about justice and mercy, and I'd watched several prominent citizens walk out in disgust. They found him in his study, a bullet in his chest, his Bible open on the desk before him. The scene was staged, I could tell immediately. This wasn't rage or robbery. This was a message. Sheriff Coleman collected me before dawn, hammering on the carriage house door with an urgency that bordered on panic. "Get dressed, Samuel. We've got another one, and this time it's bad. If I don't solve this, the governor's threatened to send in federal marshals. I'll be finished." I dressed quickly and followed him to the church. The sun was just rising, painting the white clapboard building in shades of gold and red that seemed obscene, given what lay inside. The sheriff's deputies had cordoned off the area, but a crowd was already gathering, angry, frightened people, demanding answers. Inside the study, I immediately saw what made this murder different from the others. The Reverend had been shot at close range, but there were no powder burns on his clothing. He'd been killed from several feet away, yet there was no sign of struggle. His face was peaceful, almost serene. The Bible was open to Exodus chapter 21, the laws regarding slaves. "What are you thinking?" Sheriff Coleman asked, hovering over my shoulder. I examined the room carefully. The window was closed and latched from the inside. The door had been locked. The sexton had needed to break it down when the Reverend failed to appear for early prayers. There was a cup of tea on the desk, still half full, and a plate with the crumb of what had been breakfast. "He knew his killer," I said quietly. "He let them in, had tea with them. He was comfortable enough to turn his back, probably to retrieve this Bible passage. The killer shot him then, but look at the angle of entry." I pointed to the bullet hole. The shot came from someone seated, someone he trusted enough to invite for morning tea. I spent the next 3 hours examining every inch of that room. I found a monogrammed handkerchief stuffed behind the bookshelf, expensive linen with the initials CM. I found a partial boot print near the window, made by someone with a distinctive gait. And I found something else, something that made my blood run cold. A list of names in the Reverend's handwriting tucked into the Bible. 5 names, 4 of them crossed out. The crossed-out names matched the previous murder victims. The 5th name, still unmarked, was Judge Harold Brennan. "Sheriff," I said carefully, "I need to show you something." Coleman read the list, his face going pale. Good God. The Reverend knew who was going to be killed. Was he involved? Was this some kind of... No, I interrupted. "Look at the handwriting. It's shaky, written in haste. These aren't names of targets. These are names of people he suspected were in danger. He must have discovered something, some connection between the victims. He was trying to warn them. Then who's CM?" Coleman demanded, waving the handkerchief. The answer hit me like a physical blow. Charles Morrison. James Morrison's younger brother. We'd hanged James Morrison 2 years ago for the murder of Thomas Whitmore, my first case. Charles Morrison had inherited his brother's estate and business, but he'd never believed James was guilty. He'd sworn at the execution that justice hadn't been served, that someone would pay. "It's revenge," I said, the pieces falling into place. Everyone on this list was involved in his brother's conviction. The first victim was the foreman of the jury. The second was the prosecutor. The third was the witness who testified about seeing James near the creek, and Reverend Abernathy performed the burial service. He said James died unrepentant and would face divine judgment. And Judge Brennan sentenced him to hang. Coleman finished, his voice hollow. Samuel, we need to get to your master now. If Morrison's following this pattern. We were already too late. We found Judge Brennan in his study, the same room where I'd first been called to explain my theory about the creek bed murder. He was slumped in his chair, blood soaking into the Persian rug beneath him, the same peaceful expression, the same close-range gunshot wound, and seated across from him, calmly reloading his pistol, was Charles Morrison. He looked up when we entered, and his face showed no surprise, no fear, only a cold satisfaction. Sheriff Coleman and Samuel, the miracle slave detective. I was wondering when you'd figure it out. Sheriff Coleman drew his weapon, but Morrison made no move to flee or fight. He simply set his reloaded pistol on the desk and raised his hands. Why? I asked, though I already knew. I needed to hear him say it. Why? Morrison laughed bitterly. Because of you, Samuel. Your brilliant deductions sent an innocent man to the gallows. My brother didn't kill Thomas Whitmore. I did. The world seemed to tilt. What? Thomas discovered I was embezzling from our accounts, not James, me. He confronted me by the creek. We fought. I struck him with James's walking stick. I'd borrowed it that morning. Pure chance, really. And when he fell and hit his head on a rock, when I saw he was dead, I panicked. I pushed him into the water just like you deduced. But then you brilliant boy detective found the walking stick with James's initials, and everyone assumed it was James. I let my own brother hang for a crime I committed. He stood, his hands still raised. I've lived with that guilt every day for 2 years, but the guilt turned to rage when I realized something. If you hadn't been so clever, if you hadn't found that walking stick, if you'd just been a regular slave who knew his place, my brother might still be alive. The real investigation might have found the truth. But no, everyone was so impressed with the slave who could solve crimes that they didn't question your conclusions. They trusted you absolutely. So you killed innocent people? I said, my voice shaking. The jurors, the prosecutor, the reverend, they acted on the evidence presented. They didn't know it was wrong. Neither did I intend for my brother to die. Morrison roared. But he did, and someone had to pay. I started with the people who cheered loudest at his execution, and I saved you for last, Samuel. You and the sheriff. But then I realized something better than killing you. I'd let you live knowing that your gift, your precious intelligence, had killed an innocent man and led to the deaths of 5 others. That's a better revenge than a bullet. Sheriff Coleman arrested Morrison, who went quietly. The trial was brief. Morrison confessed everything, showed no remorse, and was sentenced to hang within the month. The families of his victims attended the execution. I did not, but the damage was done. Morrison had been right about one thing. I did have to live with it. Every day, I woke up knowing that my deductions, my certainty, my pride in my own intelligence had led to a cascade of deaths. An innocent man had died because I'd been so sure I was right. Judge Brennan's death changed my circumstances in ways I hadn't anticipated. In his will, he'd made provisions for several of his slaves to be freed, including me. It was a bitter irony. The man whose murder I'd inadvertently set in motion had also secured my freedom with his death. Mary Brennan found me the day after the will was read. She'd been crying. I could see it in her red eyes. Father left instructions for you, she said, handing me a sealed letter. He wanted you to have this. I opened it with trembling hands. The judge's handwriting was precise and formal. Samuel, if you're reading this, I am dead. I write this knowing that my work with you may have placed me in danger, a consequence I accept. I have watched you grow from a clever boy into a brilliant young man. It has been my privilege to facilitate your education, however informally. I grant you your freedom not as a reward, but as an acknowledgement that enslaving a mind like yours is a crime against nature and God. You have asked me many times why I taught you to read, why I allowed you to study, why I put you in situations where your intelligence could flourish. The truth is, I hoped you might become living proof that the institution we've built our society upon is fundamentally wrong. A man who can deduce the truth from scattered evidence, who can see patterns invisible to others, who possesses both logic and compassion, such a man deserves freedom, regardless of the color of his skin. I fear I will not live to see the day when all enslaved people receive the justice they deserve. But perhaps you, Samuel, can be a beginning. Use your gifts wisely. Trust your mind, but also your heart. And know that despite the laws that defined you as my property, I came to regard you as something more, a testament to human potential unbounded by unjust circumstances. May God grant you a long life and the wisdom to use it well. I read the letter 3 times, tears blurring the words. Judge Brennan had been a complicated man, a slaveholder who recognized the evil of slavery, a product of his time who had tried in his limited way to push against its boundaries. He'd used me, profited from me, but he'd also seen me. Really seen me. Mary was watching me carefully. What will you do now? I folded the letter and placed it in my pocket. I don't know. I'm free, but I don't know how to be free. All I've ever been is a slave who solves crimes for white men. Then maybe you become a free man who solves crimes for justice, she said softly. Not for the sheriff's reputation or father's profit, but because it's right. Because people deserve the truth, even when the truth is hard. Over the following months, I struggled with that question. Sheriff Coleman offered me paid work. He wanted to hire me officially as a deputy, though he admitted the town might not accept a black deputy, free or not. I declined. I couldn't work for him anymore, couldn't be the miracle that made his incompetence seem like competence. Instead, I did something unprecedented in Willowbrook County. I opened my own investigative service. I rented a small office above the general store and posted a simple sign, Samuel Freeman, Consulting Detective, truth for those who seek it. The white citizens of Willowbrook were scandalized. A free black man, advertising services that put him on equal footing with white professionals. It was unthinkable. I received threats, had my windows broken twice, and was told more than once to leave town. But I also received clients. A widow whose husband's business partner claimed there was no money in the estate, though she was certain there should be. A freedman accused of stealing tools he'd actually purchased. A farmer who suspected his neighbor of moving fence posts to steal his land. Cases the sheriff wouldn't touch either because the people involved weren't important enough, or because solving them wouldn't bring him glory. I solved these cases the same way I'd solved murders, with observation, deduction, and an unwavering commitment to finding the truth. But I did it differently now. I charged fees based on what people could afford, sometimes working for nothing more than a meal or a place to sleep. I shared my methods with my clients, teaching them to see what I saw, to question what seemed obvious. And slowly, grudgingly, I earned something I'd never had before: respect. Not the patronizing amazement that white people had shown when the slave boys solved their crime, but genuine respect for my skills and my integrity. Mary became my staunchest defender. As the judge's daughter, she had social standing, and she used it ruthlessly. When the town council tried to run me out with vagrancy laws, she appeared at their meeting and reminded them that I was a legitimate businessman paying rent and taxes. When the newspaper printed editorials about the Negro detective as a sign of social disorder, she wrote rebuttals that they couldn't ignore because of her family name. "Why are you doing this?" I asked her one evening. She'd stopped by my office with a basket of food, as had become her habit. "Because father was right," she said simply. "You are proof that everything we've been taught about racial inferiority is a lie. And because," she hesitated, color rising in her cheeks, "because you are my friend, Samuel, you always have been. The laws that said you were my father's property were wrong." I won't pretend they weren't. I wanted to tell her that she was more than my friend, that I'd loved her since we were children, that freedom meant nothing if I couldn't freely speak my heart. But the world wasn't ready for that truth. Even freed, I was still black. She was still white. Some boundaries remained uncrossable. 3 years after Judge Brennan's death, I received a visitor who would change everything again. He was a tall, distinguished black man in an expensive suit, and he introduced himself as Frederick Douglass. "Mr. Freeman," he said, shaking my hand with a grip that spoke of strength and purpose, "I've heard remarkable things about you. A self-educated detective, solving crimes that others dismiss, building a practice that serves the powerless. You're exactly the kind of man I've been looking for." "Looking for?" I echoed, stunned to be in the presence of a man I'd read about in newspapers. Words had stirred my soul even when I was enslaved. "War is coming, Mr. Freeman. A war that will decide whether this nation lives up to its promises or tears itself apart over slavery. When that war comes, we'll need men with your skills, men who can see the truth, who can think strategically, who can teach others to do the same. I'm recruiting for something that doesn't officially exist yet. An intelligence network of free black men and women who will work behind Confederate lines, gathering information, organizing resistance, helping enslaved people escape. We need detectives, Samuel. We need people who can read a situation, find the hidden truth, and act on it." I listened as Douglass laid out his vision. He painted a picture of a different kind of detective work, not solving individual crimes, but fighting against the greatest crime of all, using the skills I developed to help tear down the system that had once enslaved me. I need time to think, I told him. I understand. But don't take too long. History is moving quickly. He paused at the door. Judge Brennan was right about you, you know. I read his letters to the Abolitionist Society. He wrote about you often. He believed you could be a beginning, a proof of concept. But I think you're more than that. I think you might be a catalyst. After he left, I sat in my office long into the night, thinking about the journey that had brought me here. From slave to detective, from property to free man, from solving crime, as for others' glory, to seeking justice for its own sake. I'd made mistakes, terrible mistakes that cost lives, but I'd also learned from them. I'd learned that intelligence without compassion is dangerous, that certainty without humility is deadly, that the pursuit of truth must be tempered with the pursuit of justice. Mary found me there at dawn, still sitting in the dark. You're going to join him, aren't you? She asked. Somehow she always knew. I think I have to, I said. Everything I've learned, everything I've become, it was all leading to this. Not just solving individual crimes, but fighting the crime of slavery itself. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled, though tears streamed down her face. I'll miss you, Samuel Freeman, but I'm proud of you. Father would be too. Come with me, I said impulsively. Work with us. You have resources, connections. I will, she promised, in my own way, from here. Someone needs to support the work from within. Someone needs to be the respectable face that helps smuggle people north, that passes information, that uses privilege to undermine the system. That can be me. I stood and took her hands. Propriety be damned. I need to tell you something I should have said years ago. I love you, Mary Brennan. I've loved you since we were children. I know the world says it's impossible, that we can never. She silenced me with a finger on my lips. The world says many things that aren't true. It said you were property. It said you were inferior. It was wrong about all of it. Maybe someday, when this war is over and won, the world will be ready for the truth about us too. Until then, know that you're loved, Samuel. Know that someone believes in you, not because of what you can do for them, but because of who you are. 6 months later, the war began. I went north, joined Douglas's network, and spent 4 years using my detective skills to map Confederate supply lines, identify sympathizers, and organize escapes. I taught dozens of other black men and women to see what I saw, to read the signs of danger and opportunity, to think like detectives in service of freedom. When the war ended, when the 13th Amendment finally made slavery illegal throughout the land, I returned to Willowbrook County. I reopened my detective agency, but with a new mission, helping freed people navigate their new reality, solving the crimes that authorities ignored, teaching others the skills that had saved my life and the lives of others. Mary and I never married. The laws against interracial marriage would remain in place for another century, but we built a life anyway, in the spaces society couldn't control. She ran a school for freed children. I ran my detective agency, and together, we worked to build a world where intelligence and compassion mattered more than the color of your skin. People sometimes ask me if I regret the years I spent enslaved, the crimes I solved for others' profit, the mistakes that cost innocent lives. The truth is complicated. I regret the injustice, the wasted potential, the pain, but I don't regret what I learned from every case. Taught me something. Every failure made me sharper. Every moral compromise showed me the importance of integrity. I was the slave who solved crimes for the sheriff, but I became the free man who solved crimes for justice. And in that transformation, painful, costly, hard one, I found something more valuable than freedom itself: purpose. The chains that once bound my wrists are long gone. But the chains I broke were never just iron. They were the chains of assumption, of supposed inferiority, of limited possibility. Every crime I solve, every person I help, every student I teach, these are acts of rebellion against the lie that any human being is worth less than another. My name is Samuel Freeman. I'm a detective, and my greatest case, the one I work on every day, is the case of how we build a more just world from the ashes of an unjust one. It's a case that will take generations to solve. But I've learned patience. I've learned to see patterns others miss. And I've learned that the most important truth is the one we create together, that every person deserves freedom, dignity, and justice. That's the story I tell. That's the truth I've dedicated my life to proving. And though the work is hard and the progress slow, I've never stopped believing in the power of seeing clearly, thinking carefully, and acting with both intelligence and heart. Some crimes take a lifetime to solve. This is mine.